Now for our final story of the evening. In Burma, growing numbers of Rohingya Muslims who have in effect been made stateless by the military government are fleeing the country by sea, hoping to make it to Thailand and Malaysia. This comes as President Obama used the 25th summit of the Association of Southeast Nations to urge the country to undertake further reform. Nathaniel Amos Sansom has this report.
Scenes such as these of displaced stateless Rohingyas is becoming an all too common occurrence across the Bay of Bengal. Filmed by the boat's captain, this group was reportedly being ferried from an internally displaced Rohingya people's camp near Satui, the capital of Rakhine State, heading for a much larger boat moored offshore. They reportedly spent 3 days at sea, leaving many passengers dehydrated and seasick. They were said to be travelling to Malaysia, hoping to be reunited with family that had already left. Officials in Malaysia and Thailand say they are seeing growing numbers of refugees arriving in this way, but those who reach their waters may nevertheless face being sent back to their country of origin.
ขณะนี้เราเดินภายใต้กรอบนโยบายอย่างนี้อย่างชัดเจนนะแล้วก็ผู้มาเนี่ยเราคัดแยก 100% ว่าเป็นผู้เสียหายจากการค้ามนุษย์หรือไม่อันนี้เข้มงวดนะฮะส่วนเรื่องการอพยพเคลื่อนย้ายอะไรพวกนี้ผมคิดว่าคงเป็นเรื่องระหว่างประเทศที่จะต้องคุยและทำความเข้าใจกันแต่ว่าภายใต้หลักการของการหลบหนีเข้าเมืองเนี่ยข้อตกลงเดิมที่เราคุยกันก็คือพิสูจน์สัญชาติแล้วก็จะต้องส่งกลับประเทศต้นทางอะไรเป็นลักษณะนี้ครับ
According to the Arakan project, which plots migration across the Bay of Bengal, about 12,000 Rohingya have left the state of Rakhine since October the 15th, risking their lives at sea in the hope of reaching less restrictive lands. Rohingya Muslims have been described by the United Nations as one of the most persecuted minorities in the world and have fled Burma in large numbers since 2012, when violent clashes with ethnic Buddhists killed hundreds and left 1,400 Rohingya homeless. This comes as Burma concluded hosting the summit of the Association of Southeast Nations. All of this comes at a time when political reform in Burma, or Myanmar as its military rulers have renamed it, is said to have ground to a halt, with the United States becoming increasingly concerned about human rights abuses in the country, including the suppression of free speech. 4 years ago, the country was being praised around the world after its military rulers liberalized the government and released opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi from 20 years of house arrest. Speaking at a press conference with President Obama during the summit, she conceded that there had been setbacks, but that she was optimistic about the future of reforms.
Our reform process is going through, let us say, a bumpy patch. But this bumpy patch is something that we can negotiate with commitment and with the help and understanding of our friends from all over the world. So let us not exaggerate the differences, the difficulties, but at the same time, let us not exaggerate the rosy picture either.
As the summit concluded, President Obama reaffirmed his commitment to stand by the country, so long as it remained committed to reform. But whether those reforms would include more rights for the Rohingya population might be another question altogether. Nathaniel Amos Sansom, The Report.
Well, with me in the studio to discuss that report is Mark Farmaner, Director of the Burma Campaign UK, and Tun Khin, who's the President of the Burmese Rohingya Organisation in the United Kingdom. Welcome to the programme, both of you. Mark, 12,000 in what, just under a month, or just over a month, that's a lot of people. Is this getting any better?
It's getting much worse. I think we've seen a crackdown that the Burmese government began in September on the Rohingya in Rakhine State. They've been raiding homes, raiding whole villages. They've been arresting, torturing. Some people are reported to have been tortured to death, and it's part of their overall policy of trying to make life so unbearable for the Rohingya that they flee the country, and it's working. We've seen this 12,000 possibly just in the last few weeks. Maybe 10% of the entire Rohingya population has fled Burma since the large-scale violence against them began in 2012. So the government's policy of ethnic cleansing, of driving the Rohingya out, is working.
And it seems that there's some doubt about whether Thailand and Malaysia will continue to take the refugees. What's your understanding of that situation?
Well, refugees, they are coming by boat, passing through, high sea. We need to see why these people are, passing through, high sea with big challenges because of that continued persecution over there. But unfortunately, Thailand, Malaysia, when they arrive there, their life ending to the human traffickers. And it's been going not this time, it's been since in 2009, Thai authorities push Rohingya, some Rohingya by boat to the sea. So this is seriously, important issue. It's a regional issue. This is important that, like Thailand, Malaysia, they have to come the root cause of the problem, why these people are coming to their country, what is the problem, and they have to, pressure to Burmese government or engage with Burmese government to stop this, ethnic cleansing against Rohingyas in Arkan State, Burma.
I mean, it's an especially cruel paradox when this conference has been taking place at the same time. I mean, there was some doubt about whether President Obama would actually even use the word Rohingya. Now, he did in the end, but did he do much more than that?
It doesn't appear that he did an awful lot more than that. No, he used it only once when he was speaking publicly. Other times he seemed to deliberately avoid trying to use the word Rohingya, which was disappointing because although he said some positive things, it was obvious that he was avoiding using that word, which some of the nationalists, the people who were against Rohingya, saw as a victory for them. I think as well...
That's interesting because it was reported over here as if he'd actually sort of done what people campaigning in favour of the Rohingya wanted him to do. And are you saying that in Burma that it was received differently?
It was received differently. The fact that he didn't... You saw a big outcry from nationalists against Ban Ki-moon when he used the word Rohingya repeatedly. You saw when Obama was using the word Rohingya was not in the same sort of forum. So when he did a town hall meeting with lots of different university students and young people from ASEAN countries, he even when he spoke about a Rohingya woman who was in the audience, he didn't mention the fact that she was Rohingya. He avoided using the word. So he tailored his messages for different audiences. But I think the key thing, the fact that we had to discuss whether or not he would even use the word Rohingya is a sign of just how bad things are, a sign of how weak the policy is. And we saw Obama there, when he met with civil society, all different types of civil society and Aung San Suu Kyi, they told him quite clearly that they didn't believe that the reform process was genuine, that it had stalled, that there were all these human rights abuses going on. But you still saw at the end of his visit, he still talked about working and supporting the government in their transition to democracy. Well, I think that all the evidence is that this isn't a transition to democracy, it's a transition to a new kind of authoritarian regime where there's no rights for people like the Rohingya, but also for other ethnic and religious minorities as well.
I mean, we saw Aung San Suu Kyi say there that it's kind of bumpy and there are some good things and some bad things. But I mean, if one way that you judge a democracy is how it treats minorities, this isn't bumpy, it's just not happening, and it's getting worse, isn't it?
Well, what I can see, currently in Burma is not even moving to the democracy or even to some reforms. Is just like a international community just to shore up by the Burmese government, some media reforms. And when you look at reforms or opening up Burma, you need to see that as a whole country reforms. Look at the Kachin people, how they were killed by the Burmese armies, like even the day before yesterday. And you look at particularly our ethnic Rohingya minority people, how they are facing. And after this reform government, so-called reform government, came to the power and 150,000 become IDPs, their houses were burned down and creating popular violence to drive them out. And MSF, Medical Sans Frontiers, were kicked out because of, telling the truth how Rohingya were massacred in Dushiradan village in last January. So we don't see any, any proper reform. We can see we can see that the worst situation Rohingya people are facing in 21st century, where they're pushing up to the camps and drive us out from the country and cutting off aid. And a kind of new apartheid system introduced. This is what President thinks in government. In my opinion, there is no reforms going on. It's just changing uniforms and just same people, they are trying to rule the country. That's what you can see. They're not going to change their constitution, and there is no, like how to say, like ethnic minority, issues. Peace talk is not, not properly successing. So you need to look as a whole country as of Burma, not only Naypyidaw, Rangoon, some reforms, some, media openings are going there. It's not, that's the way. You need to see as a whole country, this is important that multi-ethnic and multi-religious people are in Burma. So we need to judge on that way.
Mark, do you think the opposition are doing their job? Because, I mean, on the one hand, there's the account that Tun's given, what we know, what's happening to the Rohingya. And on the other hand, Aung San's saying, well, it's a bit bumpy, but on the other hand, there's some progress. I mean, that isn't the kind of language that you might expect for an opposition, is it?
No, actually 2 weeks before, Aung San Suu Kyi was unusually robust in describing the US policy. I think standing by President Obama, she wanted to be perhaps more diplomatic, especially she wanted to present their relationship as being stronger because that strengthens her hand with the Burmese government. But she said 2 weeks ago that the US was overly optimistic, that the reform process had stalled and there'd been no reforms for the past 24 months.
And are the opposition including in it? Because, in some cases, a political opposition, certainly if it were a principal political opposition, maybe even if it were an opposition that simply wanted to make as much headway as it could against the government, would be highlighting the case of the Rohingya. Are they doing that, or is that too hot potato?
The NLD are not highlighting the case of the Rohingya. Aung San Suu Kyi is not speaking up for the rights of the Rohingya. But not just, she's not speaking about human rights abuses in general. She doesn't talk about political prisoners anymore. She doesn't talk about the violence of the Burmese army in Kachin state, the Burmese army using rape and sexual violence against ethnic minority women. So overall, she's not speaking about these issues, which has created a lot of frustration with activists. But I think a problem with the opposition NLD is that a lot of its senior members, they're not just not speaking about the Rohingya issue, they're actually prejudiced against the Rohingya and they sympathise. We recently saw a very senior NLD member who spoke out against religious nationalism, Buddhist nationalism, has been suspended by the NLD from making any public speeches and is under investigation. I mean, he gave what in any other country would be considered completely reasonable, rational speech, something that people need to hear in Burma, which is that extreme religious Buddhist nationalism is not a positive thing, and nor is any other kind of religious extremism. But instead of that being welcomed, the NLD suspended him from speaking on their behalf. So this is how bad it is with the opposition party, which is why a lot of people and Rohingya people are concerned that even if you did have other genuine reform process in Burma and it ended up with an NLD government, which is certainly not on the agenda at the moment, for the Rohingya, while the level of persecution might not be quite so severe, it certainly wouldn't be a government that's sympathetic to the human rights of the Rohingya.
If the opposition aren't taking up the case of the Rohingya, who is speaking for the Rohingya now in Burma? Do they have a voice now inside Burmese politics?
Well, unfortunately, I should say currently there is no one is speaking up. Particularly, we believe that, when democracy comes down, which as an icon, as a democracy icon, we, as a Nobel Peace Prize winner, she should be speaking up. But, it's very frustrating that she dismissed that ethnic cleansing happening to the Rohingyas, even though, Human Rights Watch have well documented and visited to the areas and found out, how international law was violated and how, ethnic cleansing was taking place by interviewing the people. And she simply not visited to the areas, even though we requested repeatedly to her, and she dismissed that. So on the way, as an icon of Burma, Aung San Suu Kyi is not accepting, Aung San Suu Kyi is dismissing this kind of issues, ethnic cleansing against Rohingya. So we can see the hope is bears too far away for us, unfortunately.
Well, both of you, gentlemen, thank you very much, but I'm afraid that's all we've got time for on this episode of The Report. I want to thank all my guests for coming on today's show and to thank you at home for watching. Do remember that you can keep up with us on Twitter by following @Islam Channel and by using the hashtag The Report. But for now, we'll leave you with some scenes from upstate New York under 5 feet of snow after a freak blizzard. The storm has claimed at least 7 lives and stranded motorists overnight. Well, we'll be back in from the cold tomorrow, so do join us then. Good night.
Woodlawn by the Ford plant.
Unicon radio. Niagara County, car 3.
County car 3.
We're complete with Genesee. She is fine. Sounds been clear. United County Car 5. We checked 82. We spoke to a couple neighbors. Your daughter is using the wrong address, so we'll be checking some
Mile strips all backed up. See that? Which road? Mile strip here. It's all backed up to out my door. Which road?
4906, airport 3 o'clock and 3 miles. Just blocked out 5, 4906.